town of Barton upon Humber, which is steeped in history. In fact, a hoard of Roman coins have been uncovered here, and at nearby Hawkstow a mosaic floor was found which was discovered to have been part of a villa. Now the name Barton is derived from the word berry town, meaning barley town, because at one time Barton was famous for producing malt, which is used in the brewing of beer. And according to the Domesday Book, in 1086, Barton was such a wealthy town, it was even more important than little old Grimsby. Wife to be sold in England was sold here in Barton upon Humber in 1847. Her husband George Ray paraded her around the town with a halter tied around her waist before finally bringing her here to the marketplace for public auction, where she was sold for 1 shilling and 3.5 pence. Now the auction caused such a public outrage, the two men were arrested and tried for misdemeanours and were finally imprisoned. The town of Barton on Humber is quite significant in that it has two churches. Behind me is the splendour of the Church of St Mary, and behind me we have the Church of St Paul. There's literally about 300 yards between the two churches, and separating them down below there is the site of a blowwell. It doesn't always contain water, but is said to have been the site where St Chad baptised the inhabitants of Lindsey in the 7th century. Now St Paul's historically is quite a significant church in that it has a 10th century Anglo-Saxon church tower and is now in the care of English Heritage. As one walks around Barton, you will note the familiar sign of the Barton Knot on many of its buildings, which is a hark back to the days when the town was famous for rope making. I've come down to the rope walk, which opened in 1767 for the production of rope. Sadly, that no longer exists, but the building is Grade 2 listed and is one of the longest in the country, with a roof which spans over 3/4 of a mile long. Standing on the banks of the River Humber, the Barton is famous, of course, for the Humber Bridge, which was the world's longest single-span suspension bridge. So it's got rope making, we've had malt making, and of course it was also famous for shipbuilding, and in the 1330s supplied a fleet of ships for Edward I. And 700 years ago, in fact, Barton was the premier port in the country, even outbeating Hull over there on the north bank. And it's also famous for having the world's most inland Coast Guard station, which is just over there to my right. It's no longer a Coast Guard station, but it was when it was opened in the 1880s by His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. So as you can see, Barton's got a lot going for it, and it's on your doorstep, so why not take a visit? The tiny village of Witton on the banks of the Humber played an important part in the Roman invasion of Britain. In 43 AD, after Claudius's invasion of Britain, the Roman 9th Legion advanced north and reached the southern bank of the Humber. Maybe Witton itself was a Roman military camp of some sort. Roman coins have certainly been found along this cliff top here in Witton, and in 1998 some significant Roman findings were made nearby. And as the river has changed shape over the years, maybe perhaps a Roman settlement could have been here at some time.
In the 1950s, Lord Noel Buxton walked across the Humber to prove the theory behind a Roman causeway that was said to have linked the two banks together.
Now this causeway could certainly have been what is listed on old maps as the Devil's Causeway, which was a number of flat stones heading in an easterly direction in the River Humber, and a number of old people have recalled memories of being out in boats on the river and feeling stones scratching the underneath. Could this have been the causeway that the Romans used to cross the river from the south bank to their military camp on the north bank at Brough?
The area was also home to the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings. The name Whitton could have come from the Old English meaning White Island, or it could mean the farmstead of Whitter. The village of Whitton contains some lovely old buildings. The old manor house, built in 1687, has now been divided into two separate cottages, with one half of the building being lowered. Absolutely sacrilegious to think that somebody could have destroyed such a lovely old building. Another of which there is no trace is the railway, which opened in 1910 when it linked with a cargo ferry service. Passenger trains stopped running in 1925, and shortly afterwards so did the freight service. The line finally closed in 1951, and where the station stood now stands new houses.
The poet Henry Kirke White, while living down the road, came to Whitton and wrote about the spring, which you can see behind me. The locals call it the Plum. In 1804 it was said to be bubbling, and it was petrifying things, and certainly many people come down here to look for fossils, and as you can see there are a wealth of fossils to be found.
The Church of St John the Baptist has been rebuilt many times over the years and is Grade 2 star listed.
Now within the graveyard there are many graves to people who have lost their lives through incidents out in the river. There's one particular one here to a James William Riches, a master mariner from Ipswich, who was accidentally shot in Whitton in 1852. One time a ferry ran from Whitton to the north bank at Brough. Now just in the middle of the Humber there is a stretch of sand called Whitton Sands, which can be seen at low tide, but it's claimed many vessels and many lives. In 1906 it claimed the lives of 5 women from the same family. Their bodies were never recovered, and a funeral service was held for them out in the Humber.
In 1919, the Whitton part of the Walcott estate was sold by the village JP, James Goulton Constable, for £46,000. I wonder what it would have been worth today. There are lots of rumours and myths surrounding the history of Whitton, including those that say the famous painter J.M.W. Turner painted most of his sunsets from Whitton Cliff. Whatever, this once thriving village with its wealth of history now quietly sleeps. Haxey is a sprawling village of old and new, but on the outskirts it's easy to imagine how it probably once looked. Standing on a low ridge of clay known as the Isle of Axholme, Haxey has got an interesting and colourful history. Itself was just that once, an isle, before the Dutchman Cornelius Vermeulen and his men came along and drained the area. time, it was so watery here that there was a thriving fishing industry, and the marshes were a hunting ground for wildfowl. Isolation may have contributed to the inhabitants' fierce independence, and Vermeulen and his men certainly found a fight on their hands when they came here in the 17th century. It's perhaps this same ferociousness which keeps the Haxey Hood alive to this day. Allegedly a tradition from the Middle Ages, when Lady de Mowbray's silk hood blew away, the proceedings are rich with early pagan fertility symbols, red flowers, willow, drooping bladder, and the hood itself. Very phallic. The game is played in fields on high land where there is still evidence of strip farming, a remnant of the Middle Ages. And it's easy to imagine the peasants of Doomsday Haxey reaping and sowing this land and then getting together to partake in a strange celebration. Also has another tradition, well-behaved bell ringers, dating back to 1785 when rules were first hung up declaring that a bell ringer who wore spurs, a hat or greatcoat would be fined 6p, while anyone starting a quarrel had to pay a shilling. Many people approach Haxey from the south, crossing the River Idle at a place which was once fenland. This area is known as Parson's Cross, and it's said to be where the Duke of Norfolk said goodbye to his wife in 1397 after having been challenged to a battle by Henry Bolingbroke. The Duke, however, fought on the losing side and he was banished, never to see his wife again. In 1741, a fire devastated most of the village. Breaking out at night, it destroyed 62 houses within 3 hours. For years, people living here worked the land, and generation after generation has lived here. Now times are changing and new blood comes in. Despite living here for years, you're still an outsider if you weren't born into Isle. Melton Ross, with the busy A18 running through it, was once known as Middleton and, after numerous name changes, as Mealton Roos, the latter part of its name coming from the ancient de Ros family who inherited Belvoir Castle, and it is said they also had a stronghold here. The de Ros family castle is believed to have stood in the field alongside which the railway now runs, on one side and on the other the A18. All that is left is a mound, and around it can be seen a moat. Over the years, the de Ros family had a long-standing feud with the Tyrwhitt family of Kettleby.
In 1411, the Tyrwhits invaded Melton Ross, bringing with them 500 men. It resulted in much loss of life on both sides.
As a result of this ongoing feud, 200 years later, King James I ordered the erection of a gallows,
with the instruction that if there were any more deaths resulting from this feud, then punishment would be by death. Of course, this is not the original gallows, but it's still a timely reminder of the days of old.
In the village of Bigby, just down the road from Barnetby, is the final resting place of Robert Tyrwhitt and his wife Elizabeth. And if you look near the end of the tomb, it looks like a huge hairy man lying at their feet. In 1607, the village was leased to the Pelhams of Brocklesby before being sold to the first Lord Yarborough. Alkborough, sitting on the banks of the Humber, was an important site from a defensive point of view, as it is positioned where the Ouse and the Trent join to form the Humber.
Certainly is fantastic views from up here across the river, and far in the distance there I can see the power stations at Selby. Now just behind me is the village church, which is situated in the centre of Alkborough. Dating back to the Saxon-Norman times, though it's probably on a site which is far earlier, probably about the Bronze Age.
Heading towards the western side of the village, we reach the turf maze of Julian's Bower. Its exact origins are unknown. It's said that the monks of a nearby monastery at Walcott cut the maze, while another cites the early Christians.
Well, now I've found the maze and I know what it's all about, I might as well give it a go. Follow it around. I'm going to get lost in here. I think this maze is just taking you round and round in circles. Gosh. Oh, I think I'm nearly there. Hooray, I'm here. Finally made it to the centre. I'm worn out now. I don't have to find my way back out again, do I? Or can I just cheat now? I'm going to cheat. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to step over. Whew, I'm going for a lie down. So after that maze, I finally got my breath back and I've returned to these fantastic views. It is absolutely marvellous, and there's a plaque here which actually tells you what you're looking at. It does say, far away in the distance, that on a good day you can see York Minster, which is about 25.6 miles away. Over there you can see the Derbyshire Dales and the peaks, and then way beyond there we've got the Yorkshire Wolds. It's quite amazing. We're about 40 metres high up here of what you can actually see. But I imagine on a warm summer's day this place must be fantastic. Probably a perfect place for me to come back with a picnic.